represent the ruin of my art and my life. And now you get to be part of it. Part of what I hope is my masterpiece.
10 of the 11 guests whom dined at Hawthorne that evening were killed. If Anton Ego was in this movie, he would have absolutely been one of those 10. Anton is essentially already in the menu, but if he really were, he'd be in the place of this character, Lillian Bloom.
Lillian Bloom, oh my god.
In the world of the menu, Lillian is the food critic. Her word is the word. There is very little differentiating her from Anton and vice versa, the function they serve in the narrative of each of their movies. So for argument's sake, let's make a substitution.
No! Substitution to Hawthorne!
And pluck Lillian out of the menu and insert Anton in her stead. Let's imagine that Anton, as Lillian did, was the critic who put Chef on the map.
Put me on the map.
Let's imagine that early in Chef's career, Anton reviewed his food and liked it.
How is it?
It's good.
Consequently, clearing the path for Chef to conquer the culinary world, having visited upon him the credibility and notoriety that naturally arises in response to pleasing a critic that has become so infamous for how Herculean of a task it is to even make the attempt at pleasing them. Everything else about Anton from here on is as you know of him from Ratatouille.
I'd like your heart roasted on a spit.
Everyone who was personally invited to Hawthorne that evening was killed. If you were invited and you accepted, you were as good as dead. The decision had already been made. Two important questions then. One, would Anton have been invited to Hawthorne as Lillian was? And two, would he have accepted as Lillian did? To answer that first part, Lillian was killed because she had no apparent redeemable qualities. She was a taker, she gave very little. Anton, to be fair to him, did exhibit some redeemable qualities, though I don't think what differentiates him from her would offer him salvation from Chef's final judgment.
I'm sorry, you're dying.
And to better understand why it probably wouldn't be enough, we need to get into what it was that Chef hated about Lillian. What were the key contributing factors that led to the taking of her life at Hawthorne that night? And would those same factors have applied to Anton had he been in her place?
Thank God it's all just hypothetical anyway.
Every person on the guest list, they were all there for different reasons, their own unique offense. Many commonalities, of course, but broadly, they were all there because, quote,
You represent the ruin of my art and my life.
When Chef is explaining to his diners why they're being punished, the first thing he says to Lillian is,
Lillian, if I may, my cherished early advocate, knows the damage she has done to so many livelihoods.
He laser prints images onto her tortillas of restaurants that were brushed under the rug and put out of business after a negative review from Lillian was foisted upon each of them. We can only assume that Chef knew of these restaurants and believed they deserved better, but because of one woman's merciless and careless reviews, they crumbled.
Do you know how f***ed you are? I want to have this place close by the morning, do you understand?
It's important to state that it's perfectly fine to leave a negative review if you had a truly negative experience. If you're a critic and a restaurant serves you genuinely awful food, it is your job to inform the public, to set an expectation by providing your perspective, unobscured and free of external sway.
You provide the food, I'll provide the perspective.
Hypothetically, I think a critic that would fluff their review of a restaurant out of pity would warrant an invitation to Hawthorne as much as anyone else.
Wow. Wow. It's actually quite bad.
The problem with critics like Lillian is that they actively look for the negative. They obsess over negativity because they know the masses are more easily baited in with negativity on the lure. Lillian knows what sells in the world. She doesn't truly care for journalism. She just likes the status she attains through it, the lifestyle it affords her. She identifies that by putting others down, she raises her own profile. She is keenly aware of what she's been doing, but she's ignorant to the ethicality of it. How I think Anton differs from Lillian in this regard is I think he truly cares for his art, journalism. When he leaves a negative review of a restaurant, I believe he had a negative experience. I think he does know good food from bad food. I think his taste just over the years went up his, His palate has become overly sophisticated to the point where he really no longer represents the common man.
It is and has always been the food of the common man.
What he doesn't enjoy most likely would, yet the common man heed his words nonetheless, as Anton has practically become a governing authority in the culinary world. You dare not be seen dining at a restaurant that Anton Ego hath smitten.
Thank you for your concern, but I am perfectly capable of deciding when I eat and what.
Anton's position has given him incredible influence over culture itself, and he wields that influence with great irresponsibility. Anton, like Lillian, clearly understands that negativity sells. His wording is often aiming for sensationalist, provocative, adding a layer of creative flair to garner more attention. He has fun with his wording. He's gleeful with it. He figuratively pats himself on the back for it. He writes and publishes with complete disregard for those who have offered up their work to him. He writes with more wit and playfulness than Lillian, yes. I imagine some would get a great laugh from reading his reviews, but nevertheless, this is objectively awful behavior. It's the flair he adds in the making of his point. It's extremely insensitive and bordering on unprofessional. He buries restaurants, then dances on their graves. And ironically, I think this is also what would put him in his grave, were he in the menu.
I think you.
Excuse me. What the hell is going on, man?
Would you just let me finish, please? Is that okay?
Anton does pivot away from this behavior at some point, and Ratatouille certainly frames it to us as if he is deserving of a second chance, that he should be allowed to move on and begin anew, that the events of Ratatouille cleansed him, purified him.
No, I'm sorry, but you're all wrong.
Why are you doing this?
You're just simply wrong.
What are you talking about?
To be honest, I've always found it odd how at the end of Ratatouille, Anton was allowed to ride off into the sunset, figuratively, as if one good deed absolved him of all his prior wickedness. I don't think it was enough, and I think Chef would also see it as not enough, that a pound of flesh was due, but only a quarter was paid. In the Blu-ray commentary of Ratatouille, director Brad Bird says that Anton choosing to write a positive review of Remy's food was him sticking his neck out. I don't really think it was. Anton, at this point in his life, has become famous the world over and has accrued a personal net worth of millions. It's easy to stick your neck out when you know you've got a grade A plan B.
He's doing very well as a small business investor.
Anton is obviously very worried about the potential reputational damage of giving Remy a positive review, because it is technically giving Gusteau's restaurant a positive review, And yeah, I can see why this would be a concern for him. Anton really rose to prominence by becoming so intrinsically tied to the brand of Gusteau and the restaurant itself, like Joker became to Batman. Who would Joker be without Batman? Who would Anton Ego be without Gusteau?
You complete me.
By being the critic to take down Gusteau, as famous as Gusteau was, Anton became equally as infamous, from being the one who drove a stake into his heart. Anton continued to clown on Gusteau's restaurant, even after Gusteau himself had died. This is Anton's brand. To come out and suddenly say, Gusteau's food is sublime, the best food I've ever eaten. Yes, that would and clearly does hurt Anton's image. This dilemma forces Anton to a crossroads. He walked into Gusteau's that night as a challenger.
And he'd buried Gusteau's, and now it's like one of those horror movies where the hand comes out of the ground, and he thought it was done for, and what he doesn't like is that it's come back without his consent.
This speaks to the innate awfulness of his character. He views himself as judge, jury, executioner, the embodiment of ego itself.
Appetite is coming, and he's going to have a big ego.
The word ego is mentioned repeatedly by Chef when referring to Lillian, further supporting how easy of a switch it would be to substitute her for Anton.
Your ego was fed. That is to be expected. And no, you fed my ego as well.
Critics like Lillian Bloom, with the pretension they carry around with them, they are always searching for something new.
What does the chef have that's new?
They create the need for constant innovation. So by that logic, it becomes more and more challenging to please them with every review. The food served at Hawthorne that evening mirrored that pretension. The food was thought-provoking first and foremost, and delicious secondarily. It's revealed to us that Chef hates cooking food this way, but this is what the market demands. If you want to be the best, you have to cook crap like this, to the point where you're literally serving guests breadless bread plates, and they think it's bold and daring.
Is he gonna keep doing that?
Bread.
Critics like Lillian have become more concerned with the concept of a dish, rather than its taste and texture, how the ingredients pair, complement, and harmonize.
No, you don't get it. It's a concept.
It's very clear how Lillian represents the ruin of Chef's art and his life. He is, of course, at fault himself in this. He's not a righteous character. He has lost the plot. He wanted to be the best. He could have worked in some little bistro, cooking the foods he wanted to cook. But he wanted the accolades, the grandeur, until he didn't.
I haven't desired to cook for someone in ages. And one does miss that feeling.
Regardless, I think it's fair to assume that Anton did the same as Lillian in this regard, and I'll point to Gusteau himself in this instance. Ratatouille makes it very clear that yes, Gusteau was a fantastic cook.
Anyone can cook, but only the fearless can be great.
Does anyone doubt that what he served Anton was anything other than delicious? Of course it was delicious. Anton was probably just bored by it conceptually. Anton's negative review didn't close Gusteau's down outright, but it was the first domino being tipped over that led to the death of Gusteau himself. It's an animated movie, so it's kinda presented to us as if he died from heartbreak, but I'm willing to bet he drank himself to death, or engorged himself to death. The man was one good cheeseburger away from a clotted artery.
I'll make you feel as if you're eating the first cheeseburger you ever ate.
How do you think Chef would have responded to Anton Ego's review, leading to a renowned chef like Gusteau losing his life? There's damaging livelihoods, and then there's ending livelihoods. So I think it's fair to say that yes, Chef would have absolutely extended an invite to Anton.
I know what a bad customer is. I'm excited. We're ready for our next course.
Now, would Anton have accepted Chef's invite? I think it all depends on when the invite is extended, whether it's prior or post Anton's epiphany in the end of Ratatouille. Anton Ego is very aptly named Ego by the film's writers. His ego is as insatiable as his appetite. Ego is also something that, as I've said, is mentioned repeatedly when Chef is addressing or mentioning Lillian Bloom. It was her ego that accepted Chef's invitation. The thought of him preening for her attendance.
You love that I texted you an invitation for this evening. Me yearning for your attendance.
It was irresistible, Lillian. I think it would have also been too tantalizing for Anton.
Take a bite of this. No!
But a post-epiphany Anton, after his moment of catharsis, of clarity, you can see that he immediately drops his ego. It melts away like butter in a hot pan. His attitude is gone. He's a far more mellow version of himself. He's got sugar and happiness flowing through his veins. He ditches his entire persona and begins anew. Swaps the tailored suit for casual wear. I think had Anton received an invitation to Hawthorne from Chef at this point in his life, he likely declines it. That then begs one more question. Would Chef leave it at that? Would he have let Lillian live had she declined her invite? I think no.
That you live? No.
I think, like with Doug Verrick, the owner of Hawthorne, Lillian and Anton would have been kidnapped at that point. They wouldn't have been dining at Hawthorne, but I reckon they would have been killed in a more ceremonious manner. That Doug Verrick wouldn't have been the only fallen angel, perhaps.
Please enjoy your gift bags. Some goodies in there. A booklet of our local suppliers. Some house-made granola. One of Doug Verrick's fingers. And a copy of tonight's menu.